The morning sun caught the crimson paint of the Ferrari as Ryan Fletcher's weathered backpack brushed against its pristine mirror. Metal kissed metal with a whisper that might as well have been a gunshot in the hushed elegance of Preston Academy's parking lot. The woman who unfolded from the driver's seat moved like liquid authority. Hermes scarf draped perfectly, diamond tennis bracelet catching light with each gesture. Her emerald eyes swept over Ryan's paint-stained jeans and work boots, cataloguing his worth in a single dismissive glance. $350,000. She breathed, her manicured finger tracing the hairline scratch like a wound. The engine chose that moment to betray her. It coughed once, twice, then died with the finality of a closing coffin. Wisps of white smoke drifted skyward as her composure shattered like expensive crystal. "If you can actually fix this car," she laughed, the sound brittle and desperate, "I'll marry you." Ryan's calloused hands flexed at his sides. She had absolutely no idea what she'd just offered. 43 minutes earlier, Ryan had been spreading peanut butter on wheat bread in their cramped two-bedroom apartment kitchen. The morning light filtered through windows that hadn't been professionally cleaned in months, casting long shadows across second-hand furniture that told stories of better days. Each piece had been carefully selected from estate sales and thrift stores, functional but lacking the polish that money could provide. Oliver sat at the small wooden table, backpack already zipped and positioned beside his chair with military precision. His 8-year-old face serious as he watched his father pack lunch with practiced efficiency. The apartment smelled of instant coffee and the faint residue of last night's frozen dinner, a far cry from the gourmet kitchens his classmates took for granted. "Dad, why do all the other kids' parents drive fancy cars to school?" Oliver's question hung in the air like morning mist, innocent but weighted with implications that made Ryan's chest tighten. His hands paused over the sandwich, the simple question hitting deeper than his son intended, reopening wounds that had never quite healed. He folded the brown paper bag carefully, buying precious seconds to formulate an answer that wouldn't crush his boy's spirit or fuel insecurities that childhood should protect him from. "Different people have different jobs, buddy. Some make cars, some fix them, some sell them. That doesn't make anyone better or worse than anyone else." Oliver nodded solemnly, but something flickered in his young eyes, an awareness of social hierarchies that childhood should shield him from, but rarely did in a world where status symbols spoke louder than character. The ritual of getting ready continued in comfortable silence, father and son moving through their morning routine with the synchronized precision of a well-rehearsed dance. Ryan checked Oliver's homework folder twice, ensuring every assignment was complete and properly organized, knowing that academic excellence was their ticket to opportunities he'd never had. The Preston Academy uniform hung pressed and ready, the navy blazer and khaki pants representing a $25,000 investment in his son's future. Every thread of that uniform represented overtime hours, weekend construction jobs, and meals of ramen noodles when Oliver wasn't looking. But seeing his boy's shoulders straighten with pride when he wore those colors made every sacrifice worthwhile. The drive to Preston Academy took them through neighborhoods that grew progressively more manicured with each passing mile. Ryan's 2015 Honda Civic felt smaller with each block, its faded blue paint and minor dents becoming more pronounced against the backdrop of gleaming Mercedes and BMWs that populated the school's vicinity. Massive houses with circular driveways and 3-car garages gave way to even larger estates with gates and security systems. He'd been working double shifts at Murphy's Auto Repair and weekend construction jobs for 2 years now, all to afford the tuition that would give Oliver access to networks and opportunities that generational wealth typically provided. The sacrifice felt worth it every time he saw his son's grades or heard him speak with the confidence that a quality education fostered. Manicured lawns stretched like green carpets between properties that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Ryan gripped the steering wheel tighter, not from envy, but from determination. He'd chosen this path deliberately, understanding that Oliver's future opportunities would be shaped by the connections made within these exclusive walls. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was sacrificing his present comfort to ensure his son would never have to make the same choices. The school's bell tower came into view, its red brick facade and ivy-covered walls promising futures that money could buy and networks that opened doors before graduates even knocked. Ryan parked in the far corner of the lot, where the Civic could blend into relative anonymity among the few other modest vehicles that belonged to scholarship families and staff members. Other parents emerged from their luxury cars like they were stepping onto red carpets for a private premiere, pressed suits that cost more than his monthly rent, designer handbags that could feed a family for months, the casual confidence that came with never checking bank balances, or worrying about whether a car repair bill would mean choosing between groceries and utilities. The morning air carried the scent of expensive perfumes and the subtle leather smell of luxury interiors, creating an atmosphere of privilege that felt almost tangible. He helped Oliver with his backpack, adjusting the straps with the same care other fathers might use when preparing their sons for important presentations. The boy's uniform was crisp despite being purchased a size too large to accommodate growth spurts they couldn't afford to replace, the blazer sleeves carefully hemmed by a neighbor who'd taken pity on their situation. "Have a good day, kiddo. Remember what we talked about. You belong here just as much as anyone else." Oliver hugged him tight, his small arms wrapping around Ryan's waist with a fierce love that made everything worth it. The gesture lasted longer than usual, as if the boy sensed the social pressures his father navigated to keep him in this world. Then he was running toward the school entrance, his sneakers squeaking against polished concrete, backpack bouncing with each enthusiastic step. Ryan watched until Oliver disappeared through the massive oak doors, joining the stream of children whose futures seemed assured by birthright rather than effort. Only then did he allow himself to exhale, releasing tension he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The morning routine was complete, another successful delivery to the world that would shape his son's destiny. He turned back toward his car, already calculating the timing needed to reach the auto shop before his first customer arrived, when the collision happened with the cruel timing that fate seemed to reserve for its cruelest jokes. The impact occurred as Ryan navigated between vehicles whose value exceeded his annual income. His shoulder bag, heavy with work tools he'd forgotten to remove after yesterday's emergency house call, swung wide as he squeezed between a midnight blue Bentley and the gleaming Ferrari. The soft thud of canvas against glass was barely audible, but it might as well have been a gunshot in the morning stillness. Time seemed to slow as he watched the mirror quiver from the gentle impact, the surface unmarked, but the principle of contact established. The owner's reaction was immediate and explosive, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade through silk. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Cassandra Hartwell stood 6 feet away, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. She moved closer with predatory grace, her Christian Louboutin heels clicking against asphalt like a countdown timer to Judgment Day. Her eyes, sharp and calculating as a hawk's, assessed the damage with the precision of a forensic investigator examining evidence at a crime scene. Everything about her posture screamed expensive education, board meetings, and the kind of power that came from never having to wonder if her credit card would be declined. The morning light caught the subtle highlights in her perfectly styled hair, each strand positioned with salon precision that probably cost more than Ryan's grocery budget. Ryan raised his hands in a gesture of peace, his voice carefully modulated to project calm, despite the growing audience of parents pretending not to stare while recording everything on phones that cost more than his monthly rent. "I'm sorry, it was completely an accident. I'll pay for any damage." The words felt hollow even as he spoke them, knowing his credit cards were already stretched to their limits, and his savings account contained exactly $47.32. Around them, other parents shifted closer with the barely concealed excitement of witnesses to unexpected drama, their morning coffee forgotten as smartphones appeared like vultures circling fresh prey. The scent of expensive perfumes mingled with exhaust fumes and the crisp morning air, creating an atmosphere of privilege and judgment that felt suffocating. Cassandra's laugh was sharp and dismissive, the sound like glass breaking against stone. "Pay for it? Do you have any idea what this car costs? More than you make in 5 years, I'd bet." Her emerald eyes traveled from his scuffed work boots to his faded polo shirt, cataloguing each detail that confirmed her assumptions about his place in the social hierarchy. The other parents pressed closer, their phones capturing every word and gesture for later dissection at country club lunches and book club meetings. Ryan felt heat creep up his neck, not from embarrassment, but from the burning injustice of being judged by the thread count of his shirt and the year of his vehicle rather than the content of his character or the depth of his knowledge. "Look, I said I'm sorry. It's barely visible." Ryan kept his voice level and controlled, thinking of Oliver somewhere inside the school building, hoping desperately that this drama wouldn't reach his son's ears through the gossip network that connected wealthy families like underground cables. Children at private schools learned early that their parents' reputations reflected on them, and Ryan couldn't bear the thought of his mistakes affecting Oliver's social standing among his peers. Cassandra's emerald eyes flashed with something between amusement and contempt, her perfectly lipsticked mouth curling into a smile that held no warmth. "Barely visible. This car is worth more than most houses in this city, but I suppose someone like you wouldn't understand the concept of true quality." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire, their intended sting finding its mark with surgical precision. Ryan's jaw tightened involuntarily, his hands clenching into fists at his sides before conscious thought reminded him that violence would only confirm every stereotype she held about men like him. He forced his breathing to remain steady, his voice to stay calm, knowing that any response would only feed the growing spectacle and provide more ammunition for the social media posts that would follow. The circle of observers had grown larger, their excited whispers creating a buzzing undercurrent that made the scene feel like a gladiatorial arena where reputations were blood sport and entertainment. The morning sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows across the parking lot as the confrontation stretched beyond normal bounds of social interaction. Other parents checked their watches, torn between the desire to witness the drama's conclusion and the need to begin their own days of board meetings and charity luncheons. Ryan could feel their judgment pressing against him like a physical weight, their assumptions about his character based solely on external appearances and economic indicators. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. These people who prided themselves on progressive values and charitable giving showed their true colors when confronted with actual economic diversity in their exclusive bubble. The Ferrari's engine chose that precise moment to betray its owner with the cruel timing that fate seemed to reserve for its most pointed lessons. The luxury machine that had commanded such respect and fear moments before began to sputter and wheeze like an old man climbing stairs after a lifetime of cigarettes. White smoke curled from beneath the pristine hood in lazy spirals that caught the morning light, and the engine's death rattle echoed across the parking lot with almost poetic justice. The sound was unmistakable to anyone with mechanical knowledge, complete engine failure, expensive and embarrassing in equal measure. Cassandra's face went pale beneath her expertly applied makeup as she rushed to the driver's side with movements that had lost all their earlier grace and confidence. Her hands shook as she turned the key with increasing desperation, her composed facade cracking like ice under sudden pressure. Click, click. Nothing but the hollow sound of expensive machinery refusing to cooperate, each attempt more futile than the last. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the whispered conversations of onlookers who couldn't decide whether to offer help or simply enjoy the spectacle of privilege brought low by mechanical failure. "No, no, no," Cassandra whispered, her voice barely audible as she frantically turned the key again and again, pumping the gas pedal with growing panic. The morning board meeting she couldn't afford to miss flashed through her mind like a horror movie. The investors waiting in the conference room, the presentation that would determine Meridian Automotive's future, the 12 months of preparation that would be meaningless if she couldn't be there to deliver it. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, scrolling through contacts for someone, anyone, who could solve this crisis before her professional reputation joined her car in complete breakdown. The other parents exchanged meaningful glances, some barely concealing their satisfaction at seeing the morning's aggressor brought low by circumstances beyond her control. Phones continued recording, capturing not just the mechanical failure, but the human one, the moment when carefully constructed superiority collapsed into desperate vulnerability. Ryan watched the scene unfold with something that might have been sympathy, if not for the cruelty she'd shown him moments before. The parking lot had become a theater of social dynamics, class warfare played out in real time with an audience that understood the stakes involved. "If you can actually fix this car," Cassandra laughed, the sound bitter and desperate as she gestured helplessly at the smoking engine. "I'll marry you." The words came out as mockery, a final insult thrown at the man she'd spent the last 10 minutes degrading. But even as she spoke them, something in her expression shifted. The faintest recognition that her situation had fundamentally changed. That the power dynamics she'd relied on had shifted with the failure of her expensive machinery. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that the morning's entertainment was reaching its climax, phones recording every word for later analysis and social media distribution. Ryan's expression changed as he heard the engine's death rattle, his eyes focusing on the smoke patterns with the sudden intensity of a doctor hearing symptoms that matched a diagnosis. The dismissive posture he'd maintained throughout the confrontation melted away, replaced by something that made several observant parents take notice. His head tilted slightly as he listened to the mechanical sounds with the focused attention of someone who understood their language. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, from defensive victim to confident professional, as if the engine's distress had awakened something that social humiliation couldn't touch. "Pop the hood," Ryan said, his voice carrying an authority that hadn't been present moments before, the tone of someone who knew exactly what they were talking about and had stopped caring about social consequences. The command cut through Cassandra's panic like a knife through fog, causing her to pause in her frantic key-turning. Around them, the crowd of parents fell silent, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Ryan stepped toward the car with movements that were suddenly purposeful and confident, his earlier defensive posture replaced by the focused intensity of a professional responding to a challenge within his expertise. Cassandra hesitated, her pride warring with desperation as she weighed her options. The board meeting was in 47 minutes, the investors were expecting her presentation, and her company's future hung in the balance of decisions that couldn't be delayed. "You? You think you can fix a Ferrari?" The question came out as skepticism mixed with hope, her voice betraying the internal conflict between maintaining her social position and accepting help from someone she'd just finished humiliating. But even as she spoke, her hand moved toward the hood release with the reluctant acknowledgement that desperate times called for desperate measures. The crowd of parents pressed closer as Ryan approached the vehicle, their morning entertainment taking an unexpected turn that none of them had anticipated. Phones remained raised and recording, but the energy had shifted from voyeuristic pleasure to genuine curiosity about whether this confrontation would end in further humiliation or surprising redemption. The morning air carried the scent of burning oil and electrical components, familiar smells that seemed to energize Ryan rather than concern him. His movements around the car were confident and purposeful, suggesting a familiarity with luxury automobiles that didn't match the assumptions his appearance had generated. Ryan's calloused hands moved over the engine bay with surprising familiarity, his fingers dancing across components that most people couldn't even name, much less understand. The contrast between his work-worn appearance and his obvious mechanical expertise created a cognitive dissonance that made several onlookers exchange confused glances. 2019 488 GTB, he murmured, more to himself than to his growing audience, his voice carrying the reverent tone of someone who appreciated fine engineering regardless of its price tag. 3.9-litre twin-turbo V8, 710 horsepower when everything's working properly. His hands found the air intake system with the precision of a surgeon locating a specific organ, tracing connections and examining components with movements that spoke of intimate knowledge rather than hopeful guessing. Cassandra watched in stunned silence as this man she'd dismissed as worthless demonstrated understanding that few people possessed, his expertise becoming more apparent with each passing moment. The engine bay, which had been smoking and mysterious moments before, seemed to reveal its secrets under his careful examination. "Your mass airflow sensor is faulty," he announced with quiet confidence. "Probably caused a lean fuel mixture that triggered the knock sensor, combined with what looks like a clogged fuel injector in cylinder 3. He glanced up at Cassandra, and for the first time since their confrontation began, she saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop with the sickening realization that she might have made a terrible mistake. There was knowledge there, depth of understanding that came from years of experience rather than casual familiarity. The way he looked at the engine wasn't the desperate hope of someone guessing at solutions, but the calm assessment of a professional who had seen this problem before and knew exactly how to fix it. Around them, the crowd had grown quiet, sensing that they were witnessing something unexpected and significant. The repairs began with Ryan borrowing tools from other parents who kept emergency kits in their luxury vehicles, his requests specific enough to demonstrate expertise that impressed even the skeptical observers. He supplemented their offerings with items from his own emergency kit, tools that showed signs of heavy use but were maintained with professional care. His movements were economical and precise, each action purposeful and confident as he worked through the diagnostic process with systematic efficiency. The crowd watched in fascination as he performed adjustments that required intimate knowledge of Ferrari's engineering specifications and manufacturing tolerances. 27 minutes passed as Ryan worked with the focused concentration of a master craftsman, his hands moving through the engine bay with balletic precision. He bypassed the faulty sensor temporarily, creating a workaround that would allow the engine management system to function properly until permanent repairs could be made. The fuel system cleaning required techniques that spoke of advanced training and years of experience with high-performance vehicles. Each component he touched seemed to respond to his ministrations, the engine's distressed sounds gradually giving way to the healthy mechanical rhythms that indicated proper function. The crowd's attitude had shifted dramatically during the repair process, skepticism giving way to grudging respect as Ryan demonstrated capabilities that none of them had expected. Whispered conversations began among the parents, some recognizing that they were witnessing something remarkable, while others struggled to reconcile their assumptions with the evidence before their eyes. Cassandra stood frozen, her mind racing as she tried to process how drastically the morning's power dynamics had shifted. The man she'd publicly humiliated was proving himself to be exactly the kind of expert her company desperately needed, and the irony of the situation was becoming more painful with each passing moment. When Ryan finally stepped back, wiping his hands on a shop rag that had seen countless similar situations, the engine was purring with the contented sound that Ferrari enthusiasts paid fortunes to hear. The mechanical distress that had caused the breakdown had been systematically eliminated, replaced by the smooth operation that the car's engineering had been designed to provide. "Try it now," Ryan said simply, his voice carrying none of the triumph she might have expected from someone who had just proven his worth to a hostile audience. The understatement was deliberate, the mark of a professional who took more satisfaction from solving problems than from public recognition. Cassandra slid into the driver's seat with hands that still trembled from the morning's emotional roller coaster, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled and her composure hanging by threads. She turned the key with the tentative hope of someone who had been disappointed too many times to trust easily, and felt the engine roar to life with its characteristic Ferrari growl. The sound was perfect, better than it had been in weeks, the mechanical harmony that justified the car's enormous price tag. She pressed the accelerator gently, feeling the responsive power that made these vehicles legendary among automotive enthusiasts worldwide. She stepped out of the car on legs that felt unsteady, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror as the full implications of the morning's events began to crystallize. "How did you?" The question died in her throat as she noticed the small metal badge that had fallen from Ryan's wallet during his work, the morning sun catching its surface and making the etched text clearly visible to anyone close enough to read. Ferrari. Senior engineer. The words seemed to burn themselves into her retinas as her mind struggled to process information that contradicted everything she thought she knew about the man she'd spent the morning humiliating. Ryan picked up the badge with movements that were deliberate and calm, showing no embarrassment at having his credentials accidentally revealed. The piece of metal was worn smooth from years of handling, its edges softened by time and the oils from countless touches by fingers that had once worn it with pride. "I designed this engine," he said quietly, his words carrying across the now silent parking lot with the weight of truth that couldn't be denied or dismissed. 5 years ago, before everything changed, and I decided that maybe fixing cars was more important than building them for people who couldn't appreciate the engineering. Cassandra's face went white beneath her carefully applied makeup as she recognized the name etched on the metal badge. Ryan Fletcher. The Ryan Fletcher, whose patents her company had licensed for their hybrid development project, whose innovations had revolutionized sports car engineering and influenced every high-performance vehicle manufactured in the last decade. The man she'd publicly humiliated was one of the most respected automotive engineers in the world, someone whose reputation extended far beyond the Ferrari brand to encompass the entire industry. The weight of her words, her assumptions, her casual cruelty crashed down on her like an avalanche of self-awareness that left her gasping for breath. The parking lot had become a cathedral of silence, every parent within earshot processing the revelation that had transformed their understanding of the morning's events. Phones continued recording, but the energy had shifted from entertainment to documentation of a moment that would be discussed in social circles for months to come. Ryan's transformation from victim to authority figure was complete, but he wore his vindication with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to prove to an audience that had already revealed their true character through their assumptions and judgments. "I'm sorry," Cassandra whispered, the words barely audible above the Ferrari's purring engine, each syllable weighted with the recognition of how badly she had misjudged the situation. "I didn't know. I shouldn't have." She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't find words adequate for the magnitude of her mistake or the cruelty she had displayed. The apology felt insufficient, too small to address the damage she had inflicted not just on Ryan's dignity, but on her own character. Around them, other parents began to disperse with the uncomfortable awareness that they had witnessed something that reflected poorly on their entire community. Ryan studied her face with the analytical attention he might give to a complex engineering problem, seeing genuine remorse replacing the arrogance that had defined their encounter. The transformation was remarkable, from imperious authority to vulnerable human being in the space of a single revelation. You didn't know because you didn't ask," he said gently, his voice free of accusation but heavy with truth that cut deeper than anger could have. "You saw work clothes and decided you knew everything about me, my worth, my capabilities, my place in your world." He tucked the badge back into his wallet with movements that were unhurried, despite the growing lateness of the hour and the audience that continued to observe their interaction. "I left Ferrari after an accident during testing phase of a new model. Lost a good friend, lost my faith in an industry that prioritized profit margins over safety protocols. Been working local garages since then, trying to keep things simple and remember why I fell in love with engines in the first place." His eyes found hers, and she saw depths of pain that her casual cruelty had reopened without thought or consideration. "But I never stopped knowing how they work, never stopped understanding the art and science that goes into making these machines sing." The morning sun had climbed higher, casting different shadows across the parking lot and highlighting the contrast between the world of privilege and the reality of knowledge that transcended economic status. Ryan's revelation had fundamentally altered the social dynamics of the space, forcing everyone present to confront their own assumptions about worth and value. The expensive cars that surrounded them suddenly seemed less impressive when contrasted with the expertise required to design and maintain them. Expertise that couldn't be purchased, but had to be earned through years of dedication and study. Cassandra reached into her purse with trembling fingers, extracting a business card that suddenly felt meaningless in her hands, despite representing years of work and millions of dollars in venture capital funding. "I run Meridian Automotive. We're developing hybrid sports cars, but we're struggling with the engineering integration between electric and internal combustion systems." She paused, swallowing her pride like broken glass, each word of admission costing her something she couldn't quite define. "We could use someone with your expertise and reputation. If you'd ever consider consulting for a company run by someone who clearly needs to learn better judgment." Ryan took the card, studying the elegant lettering that proclaimed her CEO status and the company logo he recognized from industry publications. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The woman who'd mocked his worth was now begging for his professional help. The tables turned completely from their initial encounter. "I'll think about it," he said, and meant it, his voice carrying the diplomatic neutrality of someone who understood that business relationships could transcend personal conflicts when professional respect was established. The card disappeared into his wallet next to the Ferrari badge, two pieces of metal that represented different chapters of the same story. The school bell rang in the distance, its bronze tone carrying across the morning air to signal the start of classes and the end of their unexpected encounter. Ryan glanced toward the building where Oliver was safely settled into his morning routine, probably unaware of the drama that had unfolded in the parking lot, but certain to hear about it through the social networks that connected private school families like underground cables. The thought of his son's reaction, pride mixed with concern about social consequences, made him smile despite everything that had happened. "About that marriage proposal," Ryan said, allowing a hint of dry humor to creep into his voice for the first time since their confrontation began, the joke serving as both icebreaker and acknowledgement that they had both survived a morning that could have destroyed reputations and relationships. "I think we should start with coffee and see if we can have a normal conversation without anyone's car breaking down or anyone making assumptions about anyone else's character based on their clothing choices." The suggestion carried multiple layers: professional courtesy, personal forgiveness, and the possibility that even the worst first impressions could be overcome with effort and understanding. Despite everything that had happened, despite the humiliation and the revelation and the fundamental shift in their power dynamic, Cassandra found herself laughing. A real laugh this time, not bitter or desperate, but genuinely amused by the absurdity of their situation. "I'd like that very much," she admitted, her voice carrying a vulnerability that hadn't been present during her earlier displays of arrogance. "I owe you far more than an apology. I owe you a complete reassessment of how I judge people and what I think gives anyone the right to treat others as less than human." The crowd had largely dispersed by then, parents heading off to their own responsibilities with phone footage and stories that would fuel conversations for weeks to come. But the space between Ryan and Cassandra had become something different. Not quite friendship, but no longer hostility. A tentative beginning that acknowledged both the damage done and the possibility of redemption. The Ferrari purred between them like a mechanical mediator, its perfect operation a testament to expertise that transcended social boundaries and economic assumptions. 6 months later, the Preston Academy parking lot looked much the same on the surface, but everything meaningful had changed in ways that weren't immediately visible to casual observers. Ryan's Honda Civic still occupied the same corner spot, its practical reliability unashamed among the luxury vehicles that surrounded it. But now it was frequently joined by Cassandra's Ferrari and a company car from Meridian Automotive, where Ryan had accepted the position of Chief Engineering Officer after months of careful negotiation and gradual trust building. The hybrid sports car project was ahead of schedule and under budget, their professional collaboration proving as successful in the boardroom as it had been unexpected in the parking lot. Oliver ran toward both of them after school with the enthusiasm of a child whose world had expanded in ways he was still learning to understand. His report card displayed straight A's, but more importantly, his confidence had grown as he watched his father's expertise gain recognition and respect from the same community that had once dismissed them both. The boy's backpack bounced against his shoulders as he recounted his day, his stories including friends whose parents now spoke of Ryan with admiration rather than condescension. Cassandra had learned to see beyond surfaces during their months of working together, her company's culture slowly shifting under Ryan's influence toward valuing knowledge over pedigree and expertise over appearance. She'd discovered that the best engineers often had oil under their fingernails and stories worth hearing, that innovation came from understanding rather than assumption. Her board meetings now included discussions of hiring practices and company culture that prioritized capability over credentials, changes that had improved both morale and productivity in ways that financial metrics couldn't fully capture. Ryan had discovered that success didn't always require sacrifice of principles, that partnership could multiply rather than divide strength when built on mutual respect and shared goals. The engineering challenges at Meridian Automotive had reignited his passion for innovation while allowing him to maintain the work-life balance that his son needed. The marriage proposal joke had become a running gag between them, evolving into serious conversations about compatibility and shared values. Then finally into a small ceremony held in the very parking lot where they'd first clashed. A deliberate choice that honored the journey from conflict to understanding. The Ferrari still purred like a contented cat whenever Cassandra drove it, its engine a testament to the hands that had fixed it, and the understanding that had grown from that pivotal moment. But more importantly, it had become a symbol of something larger, the recognition that expertise and worth couldn't be measured by external appearances or economic indicators. In the end, Cassandra had been right about one thing in her desperate moment of car trouble. Ryan Fletcher had indeed fixed her Ferrari, but he'd also fixed something far more valuable and harder to repair, her perspective on what truly mattered in evaluating human worth. And sometimes, that kind of transformation was worth more than all the luxury cars and social status that money could buy, because it changed not just individual lives, but entire communities willing to learn from their mistakes.